So, the most recent ban list really took a toll on a lot of the top decks of last format, but there was one deck that went completely untouched. Let's talk about Labyrinth. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Cards and Coffee. Today we're going to be talking about a deck that looks to be like one of the front runners coming into this format, one of the scariest trap decks we've had in a while, the IKEA variant of the Labyrinth deck. Now, no deck is without flaw, and there's definitely some to talk about, but this deck is super consistent and can pull out any trap card at any time, really making the versatility in the toolbox that this deck has scary against basically any matchup in the meta right now. But first, before we dig into all that, please go grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you guys can sit down and tune in. Let's do this. Alright, so like I said, Labyrinth is really looking like it's going to be one of the top contenders of this format, and the fact that Kashtira, being its worst matchup, just got hit on the ban list as well, really makes it to where this deck not only is just as powerful as before, but has that much more room to thrive in this meta. But without wasting any more time, hopping into the monsters, for the boss monsters, of course, we're going to be playing one copy of Lovely alongside 3 copy of Lady Labyrinth herself. I think for the most part this is very standard, but I have seen some lists recently cut the Lady to 2, which is very understandable. There's a lot of tech cards that people want to fit in this deck, and it's one of those cards that, while it's not needed, definitely having 3 is something that I personally like. These 2 cards really are the heart and soul of the deck, not only constantly recurring traps from the grave or pulling some out from the deck for whatever scenario you might need, but Lady being an untargetable boss monster that can summon itself from hand, and of course Lovely being an interruption, being able to destroy cards on the field or hand as well, really makes it to where you have 2 insane boss monsters in your deck, and when you pair that alongside all the other disruptions this deck sets up, it can get really unfair really fast. Oh, and don't forget, when Lovely's on the field, your opponent can't respond to your normal traps with monster effects, so you're not negating anything with Baron, and you're not ashing or belling our welcome traps. But moving on after that, of course, we're going to be playing 3 Stratos. Why wouldn't you play 3? This card's really insane. On normal or special, you can add any Labyrinth card from your deck to hand. This card really is the glue to the deck, whether it's getting access to your Lady or whatever missing welcome trap you might have. But not only that, it also gets you into your furnitures, which we are playing 3 copies of Stovey, 3 of the Chandelier, and 1 of the Clock. Aside from the Clock, I really wanted to max out on all the ones that let me search out the trap cards. I want this deck to be as consistent as possible, plus the recursion these cards generate is really insane. I've seen a lot of people play multiple Clocks, and I definitely can understand why. Being able to use a set trap card the turn it's set is really insane, but personally I just like searching it out for the ideal moment I need it, plus you have ways to loop it in the mid to late game as well. But at the end of the day, this card really doesn't do anything by itself, so I really don't want to brick on it, and of course I really don't want to draw multiples as well. So that's it for the monsters. Now moving on to the Labyrinth trap ratios. For me personally, I think this is pretty standard, at least in the IKEA variants. I'm playing 3 big welcome alongside 2 of the regular welcome. If you're looking to increase the consistency or maybe the longevity of the grind, you definitely could put the 3rd welcome Labyrinth in there as well. But big welcome really is the heart and soul of this deck, not only putting cards back in your hand, dodging stuff like skill drain that you might be playing or effect veilers or imperms your opponent might be throwing at you, but it'll also trigger all the furnitures in your grave. It'll trigger the Lovely to pop cards from the field or hand, and of course Ariana to help you draw cards as well. So this card really does it all, plus having a graveyard effect to banish itself and bounce a card on the field as well really makes it to where this card obviously is one of the best cards in this deck, hands down. But that's it for the Labyrinth cards. I actually don't have a field spell on me, but that's something I definitely would include. I really love the ability to make your trap cards into an additional interruption. I'm actually waiting for it to come in the mail right now, but just know if you have access to the card, I definitely think it's a solid include into the main deck. It really adds another layer to this deck, putting a lot of pressure on your opponent. But now after that, moving on to some of the singleton trap cards that I like pulling out of the deck with Lady. For the 2 standard ones, of course, we're going to be playing the 1 Terrors of the Overroot and the 1 Dogmatic of Punishment. In my opinion, right now, these are just 2 of the best generic removal cards that are normal traps in the game right now. There's definitely a long list of things you could include, but at the bare minimum, I think these 2 need to be included in the main deck. But after that, I'm also deciding to include 1 of the Karma Cannons. I really love this card. This card is insanely versatile, plus a blowout against Kashtira Cash Tira and Sprite. Plus, if your opponent has Link monsters or a Towers-like monster like Noir, it won't get set face down, but now your opponent has to send them to the grave. This card is so insane and so versatile, and for that reason, I definitely think it's one of those one-of traps that really fit in this deck great. But then for the last singleton trap that I'm opting to main is the one-dimensional barrier. This card is a blowout in so many matchups, be it branded or any of those synchro-based decks like Sword Soul, Manadone, or heck, even Sprite when they go to use the Assault Synchron in the future set. I can only imagine the times where they go activate Assault Synchron, summon it to the field, now they're locked into Synchro summoning, and then you flip D-Barrier and call Synchro and skip their turn entirely. This card is so good against so many things, and for that reason, I definitely think it's one of those cards that's worth a main deck slot. But that's it for the singletons, but we do play one more normal trap in the main. I think it's pretty obvious what I'm talking about. Obviously, it's going to be 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. This kind of segues us into our hand traps, but I just think Imperm is one of the best hand traps right now, and the fact that it has synergy with this deck as well is really what puts this card over the top in this deck. Now, speaking of hand traps with synergy, Nibiru is one of the craziest hand traps in this deck. Now, not every deck plays into Nibiru, but so many players get greedy when they play against the Labyrinth deck. Once this deck gets going, it's very hard to catch up if it gets ahead on resources, so you have to get very aggressive and play into boards, and Nibiru is obviously one of the most powerful and punishing hand traps at stopping your opponent from doing that. Plus, the fact that it has the synergy with the furniture cards as well is really insane. In case you didn't know, with Nibiru, when you go to wipe your opponent's field, you can chain one of your furnitures, pitching the Nibiru from your hand alongside it. Nibiru will still tribute the field even though it's engraved, but since it didn't summon itself, now your opponent doesn't even get a token. It's pretty unfair. But after that, for some of the last hand traps in the deck, we're obviously going to be playing 3 copies of Ash because it's just generically good against everything, plus it's great against branded, and of course in the mirror match this card's insane. But speaking of branded and the mirror match, I'm also really loving 2 copies of Ghost Bell in the deck as well. Even though Cash Tira was hit on the ban list, Arise Heart is still a card, and you definitely have to respect it, and while this card isn't the best against that deck, it is something that can at least stop Birth from bringing stuff back. Really quickly though, while we're on the topic of Cash Tira, that still is a very awkward matchup, but the fact that you have Imperms and of course Nibirus, because a lot of the players are getting really greedy with their boards, at least right now, really makes it to where we have some tools to deal with that card, and the fact that once it's gone, we're just not going to have to worry about it as much anymore. So that's it for the hand traps. Now moving on to some of the tech cards that I'm opting to play. Like I just said, Arise Heart is a heck of a card, so we are opting to main deck 2 copies of Gamma Seal. This also is just a generically good removal card for this deck. Whether it's trading with a Baron or outing your opponent's Dragoons or Noirs, this card is so good for this deck and really solves a lot of problems this deck has. Plus, there's the added bonus that Big Welcome could bounce this back to hand, so being able to kaiju a monster, put it back, and then kaiju another one really sets up for some really funny plays that this deck can do. But after that, this card's very staple. We're opting to play 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. The only other option really is Prosperity, and I would consider running 1 in addition to the Extravagance, but there's no world that I'm not playing 3 copies of Pot of Greed. Plus, this is one of the best cards to bait Ash, which is one of the scariest cards against your deck. And then the last card in the deck, the one called by the grave, making it a solid 40. Again, dealing with those ashes, dealing with those bells, really being a great problem solver for the deck, and one of my favorite cards to include. Now, before hopping onto the extra deck, if you're looking to help this channel grow, make sure you subscribe and of course, comment down below and like the video. Plus, if you want to go another step further, you can go ahead and click the link down below to Next Level Anime. They're the guys that make the gear I wear now and what I wear at events, and if that's something you're into, you guys should definitely check them out. They have so much amazing anime gear at an already affordable price. Plus, if you use my code Cards&CoffeeTCG, you'll save an additional 10%, not only keeping money in your pocket, but a portion of that purchase will come back to the channel, helping me make content for you. But with that out of the way, moving on to one of my favorite parts about this deck, the extra deck. Starting things off with the staples for sure is 3 copies, unfortunately, of Chaos Angel and 3 copies of Muckraker. These cards are so insane in the deck. The fact that Chaos Angel is not a hard once per turn makes it to where you're able to summon this card, banish something on the field, use it in something else to make Muckraker, bring it back from the grave, and then banish another card. I think I've resolved Chaos Angel 3 or 4 times in one turn. It's so insane how easy it is to make in this deck, and that's why you have to play 3 of each, because Extravagance could hit them. In case you're wondering how you're making Chaos Angel, your Stovey Torby summons itself from the grave and it's a level 2 dark. So when you pair that with either of your 2 boss monsters being level 8, you don't get the unaffected part because you're not using a light. But again, it won't be destroyed by battle. You got a 35 beater, and really you're just using allowing it to freely banish all your opponent's cards. It's really insane. Oh, and don't forget, these are fiends, so it really hinders you in no way with your engine. Now, speaking of fiends, some of the other utility fiends I'm playing is the 1 Phoenix and the 1 Cerberus. These are just obviously great removal cards for the deck, and the fact that they're fiends is something that I love to include. One thing to note about Cerberus is there are going to be games that your opponent has a really chunky Nibiru token, so just being able to have a utility card in the extra deck to deal with that is something that I find comes up quite often, and I definitely think is an auto include. But for the last link monster in the extra deck, it's our punishment target, the Tri-Brigade Arms. We're just using it, of course, to dump the Garura to allow us to draw a card. This thing's a 35 beater, so it helps punishment out a lot of things, and again, they are one of, so there are times they are going to get hit with the extravagance, but by all means, if you find that you really like these cards in your extra, it's very easy to make room for 1 more copy of each. Now, speaking of punishment targets and the last fusions in the extra, we're of course playing 2 copies in a Tis. This one I find comes up more often than the Tri-Brigade for punishment because of how versatile it is. It's only 2,500, so it doesn't out too many things, but this also outs some back row cards, which is pretty relevant. Again, you can mess with these ratios all you want. The Chaos Angels and the Muckrakers are really the only thing that absolutely come up all the time, but for me, with my extra slots, I'm opting to run 1 copy of Baguska, 1 copy of Ding, and of course 1 copy of Zeus. There are going to be games that 2 level 4s come up, so setting up Baguska is pretty easy. Plus, it's an easy rank 4 to set up Zeus, and also Ding's really insane as well. Having a non-targeting send, and of course having Zeus to wipe fields, while it doesn't always come up because again Extrav hits these 1-ofs at times, I definitely think these are really powerhouse cards for the deck, and while we have the room, I figured might as well play them. So that's going to wrap things up for today's video. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate all the support you guys have been giving the channel. Labyrinth really is looking like it's going to be one of the top contenders coming into this format, and while there are cards that can counter this strategy, and there are definitely flaws, this deck is super consistent, super toolbox, and being able to pull out any trap from your deck at any time really makes it to what, in my eyes, makes a top tier deck. But once again, thanks again for tuning in, and here's hoping to see you guys on the next video. Peace.